Hi everyone, today we're going to brew Chemex and I wanted to go through a few of the things that I do very differently using this pour over device versus anything else I do with pour over. There are a few things that make it quite unique, notwithstanding the type of filter papers that they put out. This is one kind you can get which are unbleached and they're very, very thick and they're brown and they taste really, really bad unless you run a lot of water through them. So it's a little bit more wasteful. Obviously heating water is a little bit energy rich, and if you're using really nice water, it's a shame to then only use it to rinse the paper filters. So you can boil nice brewing water to make the coffee with and just normal water to rinse the paper with if you want to save your nice brew water. Really concentrate on the thick part here that we put against the spout, because there's 3 layers there and only 1 layer here. And this will just rinse out some of that papery taste. You really need quite a lot. You can buy the bleached version as well. Actually, I think they're oxygen cleansed, not bleached, from Chemex, and they still have a bit of flavour. And you can buy circle ones, and you can buy ones you fold yourself. These are a little easier, they just store in a little box. It's what I had. And they're fine, but a lot of rinse water to take out that flavour. And then I'm going to use that to heat my cups. Again, not something I would normally do, but this is a really, really slow brewing method. So I'm definitely going to have coffee that's a lot cooler to drink at the end of it than I would at, say, a single cup pour over. A little bit extra. Now the reason it's so slow is this is probably the coarsest grind setting I will ever recommend. Coarser even than I recommend for the French press, which we did in a different video. And the reason is that the mechanics of this pour over are a little different to other ones. There's no rifling or anything to hold that filter paper off of the glass itself. So there's only really one way for the water to go, and that's down through this central bit here, and air is displaced through the spout here. So I've got pretty coarse grinds, 60 grams. I don't think it's really worth using the Chemex to brew anything less than that. There are better options. But if you're brewing a litre or so, you've got the Mocha Master and you've got the Chemex, and this is definitely more attractive. Excuse me. Hot water. This is a little bit more attractive and obviously more of a design piece and a bit more of a spectacle if you wanted to bust it out after dinner. And it's a classic piece of design. I've tailed off my scale. I've got 60 grams of coffee in the cone, very coarsely ground, and I can never really convey this one very easily. I think freekeh or cracked freekeh, that wheat sort of grain that's really, really coarse is what I tend to describe it as. This is just off the boiled water, and I'm going to bloom with about double the water to coffee, so about 120. This is a really handy feature with the Wolfer Uniform scale here that I don't tend to use much, apart from if I'm brewing a Chemex, because I can't really see the numbers given that the base of this brewer is quite big. So I've paired it to my phone with Bluetooth, and I've got a little display here, and I can run the timer as well, so that's kind of cool feature that it has. What you'll notice is I'm not getting in there and stirring like I did with the single cup and the 2 cup Hario V60. The reason being, that's to ensure everything gets really wet before then pouring through, and you don't want anything to sort of bypass around the sides or have dry pockets. Because we're going to be adding water so often and frequently throughout this brew at stages, it's going to get to those parts, I'm pretty confident, and there's not as much a chance of clumping because the grind isn't as fine. So that was nearly a minute. Probably could have done that a bit faster. But really what I want to do now is add a little bit of water, and I'm not going to add much every time now. It's only going to be topped up with a slow, small pour to keep the level relatively low. These are really prone to choking. If this thick paper here folds into the spout, you'll create a bit of a vacuum down here, and there won't be anywhere for the water to drip through, the coffee to drip through, sorry, because the air can't get out, so it gets this spluttering effect. So you have to keep the level relatively low and keep it topped up, and really that's going to mean you're maximising and sort of leveraging the potential of percolation brew methods. We're adding fresh solvent the whole while, which is rinsing those grinds of their flavouring compounds. So that's why we can get away with such a coarse grind as well. If you do a coarse grind for a regular pour over coffee, it's likely going to be very, very thin, very under extracted, a little sour, and just underwhelming. Here we can get away with it because the extraction time is going to be so high, because we're sort of slowly adding the whole time, that we go through all of those stages of percolation without needing it to use such a fine grind. So if you think about a coffee bean as a piece of honeycomb, like the inside of a crunchy bar or honeycomb that you might make, there's all of these little cells and pockets with flavouring compounds in them, and they might be oils or sugars or acids or anything like that. If you grind the bean very, very fine, you expose those sort of little caves and little pockets to the water very easily. You increase the surface area of the coffee itself through a finer grind. So it's very easy to extract in the water very quickly. But with a coarser grind, the water needs to wash off all the flavouring stuff from the outside of those grinds, but also get into them and then dissolve the flavouring compounds and make its way back out into the brew water. So there's a few processes that it has to go through, and it obviously takes more time. Heat will help, agitation will help, and that's why, whenever we pour, we're agitating as well. It's not staying static. So we will still get there. It just is going to be a much slower brew. And I really don't see Chemex as being used so much in cafes in the UK. And obviously part of the reason is they're very expensive. They're fragile because they are glass. And they are relatively slow, so they're not necessarily suited best to service in a cafe. But also I think that they innately brew coffee to taste a little different. They will strip out a little bit more character. I think with darker roast profiles they can be good because they almost clean up the cup a little bit. And I definitely see them more frequently in cafes if I'm at origin in a producing country, say in Central America. Chemex is quite a popular option on the brew bar menu in specialty cafes. So what I'm brewing today is actually a test roast of one of our coffees. We have a few new filter coffees that we're about to release. One Kenyan, 2 Guatemalans, and this Colombian coffee. And this is from a farmer called Victor Barrera, whose coffee we bought last year for the first time. And it's a tabby variety. He is doing quite an interesting fermentation profile on his coffees after depulping them, where it's almost like a slop back technique where he'll ferment a batch and then reintroduce fresh depulped parchment coffee and ferment again, which on paper is really not good practice, but the cups are great. They are a little wild, there's a pulpiness to them, and there's definitely ferment character in there, and there's definitely a lot of sugar in the coffee as well, because we test roasted this batch and it's picked up more colour than I would necessarily want. I think if we were to lighten it up a few shades, it's going to be a bit sweeter and brighter and have better clarity. But given that it's a bit more of a full, punchy roast, this brew method is actually going to suit it. It's going to strip it back a little more and make me able to taste the flavours in the coffee itself a little easier. So I'm just continually topping up, trying not to let this level go too high. I'm at 5 minutes and I'm only about 3/4 of the way there. I've got 750 grams in there. I've been dabbling with about 7 minutes total time to get all my brew water in, and that just seems excruciatingly long. And if this brew method is only really brought out when you want to entertain, when you're talking and having a lot of people share a pot of coffee, then that's fine. It doesn't matter. It's not about rushing in those circumstances. But if you wanted to make one of these every morning, you're going to need to be very patient or have a newspaper to hand. So yeah, the variety is, as I mentioned, is tabby in this coffee. And it's a hybrid variety between Bourbon and Typica, but also some Timor hybrid, which is has some Robusta genetics in it as well. So it's a very, very hardy crop. It's got some resistance against leaf rust, for example, but still a really, really nice cup profile. And that combination is quite a rarity. In the specialty coffee world, you don't really see hardy, resistant varieties displaying really nice cup characteristics. But here we do, so that's kind of exciting. And also just the way that the plant grows, it's very spindly, long branches with tight clusters of cherries. So supposedly it's very, very nice to pick on, making a picker's job a bit easier. Not just to be selective, but to actually work on. So just coming up to 1,000 grams of water. And I'm at 6.5 minutes. I'm just going to move it off the scale. So that's just finishing draining through. an incredibly clarified brew. This is. There's just very little of the body of the coffee going to sort of punch through because it's dripping through such a thick bonded paper. So it is sort of going up a few shades lighter, almost like exposing a photo, turning the brightness up or turning the exposure up. We're about there. One thing that I'd recommend if you're going to buy a Chemex or keep yours really nice is buying some ball bearings, because if you ever try and clean out a wine decanter or something with a narrow neck and a wide body, it's really hard to get a bottle brush in there, or especially a sponge if you're just using a regular scouring sponge. But if you put hot soapy water and some ball bearings and swirl it around, that friction's really going to help loosen any sort of coffee oils or anything staying on inside the glass. But it's relatively easy to keep nice, and obviously removing the wood collar and the leather tie. Give it a little mix. I'm really intrigued to see how this coffee performs through the Chemex. Still aromatically like the other cups I've had of it, whether cupping it to assess the roast or making some brewed coffee to test how it brews. And that's a little bit wild fruit, kind of very, very ripe strawberry and even coconut kind of aromas. Raspberry, peach, there's a lot going on actually. It's kind of a fudgy sweetness as well, not clean white sugar. It reminds me of more of jaggery or an unrefined sugar. It's still really intense. It does suit it because it is cutting through very well. Something very, very delicate, maybe I wouldn't recommend to brew with the Chemex, but with something as ripe and buxom as the Victor Pereira's Tabby, I think it will stand up quite well in it. We will tweak the roast. I'm not completely happy with how the roast on the coffee is working, but it's still really tasty like this, and actually it's sort of bringing back some of the faults that the roast is bringing to the cup, so the two are working well together. And again, for 60 grams of coffee to a litre of water, or 1,000 grams of water, that's a starting ratio, and if you want to have something with a bit more intensity to it, I would increase your dose and maintain a similar grind. You can't really play too much with the grind profile on this brewer. You need to have it very, very coarse and keep dripping slowly through, adding water as you go. Otherwise, you're just going to face issues with just the mechanics of the brewer. But you can still tweak that ratio and go 65, even up to 70 grams if it's something that you really want to have more strength from. But I wouldn't really go much lower with this one. If you're wanting to bring the ratio down and go for higher extraction but similar strength, I'd maybe stick to something like a V60 or a Kalita. I wouldn't go much below 60 grams a litre, because mainly for the body of the coffee, it's going to start to suffer and become a little thin. I'm really excited to play with this one a little bit more. We only got a few boxes of the coffee last year, and it was a Filter subscription members exclusive coffee, whereas this year it's going to be a regular general release. So keep an eye out for it. Can highly recommend buying a bag. It's really interesting coffee. But that's all we have for today on the Chemex. Do email us at betterbrewing@workshopcoffee.com if you have any specific queries about brewing with any method, but in particular the Chemex if you want to get more out of the brewer. Thank you very much indeed, and see you soon.